KIIS FM.
This is the KIIS FM Community Council, a presentation of the Public Affairs Department of 102.7 KIIS FM, Los Angeles.
Guys, welcome back to the Community Council, and thanks again for joining us today. If you're just tuning in, we're the show that talks about everything great in the community. We're also here to show love to all of the amazing nonprofits out there trying to make a difference. And on the phone with me, I have Dr. Joseph Chan with the Beverly Community Hospital. Hi, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
And you're here to talk about pool summer safety. Let's jump right into it. So what is the best way to prevent drowning?
Well, the first thing is, every pool needs to be protected. We need to make sure that children are not gonna get there unattended. So, when you're by the pool, you want to make sure you're watching closely, but you want to make sure that no one gets into the pool when you're not looking. So every pool needs a fence. It needs to be at least 4 feet high, and the openings can't be wider than 4 inches so a child couldn't just slip through. The other thing is you want to make sure that the pool's not attracting kids that, when you're not there. So you don't want to leave any pool toys near the pool to avoid attracting small kids who want to go play with it. The fence also should have an automatic alarm. They recommend nowadays that they have an alarm that triggers that will go off for 30 seconds so that if you're not looking, that the gate will, number one, self-latch, and that if it's left open, that it'll trigger an alarm for 30 seconds so you go start looking for it. That's the first step.
Mm-hmm. So you'll get up and close the gate just to make sure your child and things like that aren't getting in the pool. Yeah.
And then when you're at the pool, the best way to prevent drowning is obviously to be watching them. So if you have any children, less than 14 years old, they should never be unattended. You should obviously be there. But the other thing that sometimes parents forget is that you can't be doing something that's too distracting. So anything that's taking, 100% of your attention, like reading a book, getting engrossed in a conversation on the phone, drinking too much alcohol, anything like that could take your attention away, because drowning is something that happens quickly and then also very quietly. So they could be submerged, gasping for air under the water, and won't even make a peep. So if you're not paying 100% attention, that's when accidents can happen tragically.
You know what's funny? I think people are under the common misconception that when you are drowning, there is a lot of noise happening. You hear the water splashing and things like that. So I'm really glad that you said that.
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the tragic things that can happen. Now, if you're able to find them drowning, sometimes, not all parents themselves are the best swimmers. And so if they're off in the deep end, somewhere in 8 or 9 feet, it could be difficult for them to try to rescue somebody. So you also want to make sure that you have things by the pool to try to help rescue them, like a rescue buoy or a shepherd's crook, which is kind of like a long pole with a hook on the end so that you can reach out to them and give them something to grab onto.
You spoke about special equipment before. Is there any other special equipment around the home for a pool that a parent needs to have?
Other than the rescue equipment, the other things you want to do is things that prevent accidents. So you want to make sure that there's power safety covers over the outlets. If there's people around, if it's a bigger pool, if it's an apartment area, you want to make sure that your apartment building has signs on how to do CPR. You want to make sure that everyone knows how to do CPR, and then all the rescue equipment that I mentioned. And if you live in an apartment building, and if you're not responsible for things like the fence and the gate, if you don't think that the protective equipment is sort of up to snuff, you need to make sure the contact management to make sure those things are in place.
100%. What is dry drowning?
So dry drowning is a term that's not really used in the medical community. And there was a couple of incidences where children had sort of delayed complications after experiencing a near drowning. And so it was a myth that was kind of sensationalized. And I think some people took it to infer that somehow a child could have a near drowning experience and then suddenly drop dead later. So we really don't, in the medical community, call things even near drowning or dry drowning. What we call it is drowning essentially is just the deprivation of oxygen when you are in the water. And that can occur because of aspirating water, or it can occur just because someone is holding their breath, trying not to aspirate or swallow water, and then they deprive their oxygen in their brain. So they might pass out from asphyxiation and never get any water in their lungs. So we just really divide drowning into fatal or non-fatal drowning, and then among non-fatal drowning with injury. So some people have the misconception that, you can, not drown and come out of the water, look fine, and just drop dead later. You can have complications if a child aspirates or swallows water down the wrong tube, and it can have complications later, especially with things like salt water or even pool water if they swallow a large amount. But they don't just suddenly drop dead later. What happens is that if there's excess water in there that they haven't spit back up, it could lead to an infection because any water or liquid that's in the body that's not supposed to be there could be a setup for bacteria to grow. But they're not just going to suddenly, all of a sudden pass out or something like that. What's going to happen is they'll probably start to show the classic symptoms of pneumonia, like having a cough, having worsening breathing, having a fever. In some cases, it could happen quickly, but more so over a couple of hours, and they will definitely show signs. Or if it's just a little bit that starts to grow, it could happen over days. But again, it's not going to just happen, suddenly in the middle of the night or something like that.
I never even heard of that. Like people getting out of the water, feeling fine, and then all of a sudden just like dropping dead and whatnot. Huh.
Yeah, there was a couple of cases a summer ago where, a child had aspirated and they basically eventually developed a pneumonia and they got really sick. And then over the course of a couple of hours, they got admitted to the hospital and they had a really bad pneumonia and then died. But it wasn't immediate. It was something that we would have expected and you would have seen coming. It did happen relatively quickly over the first couple of hours. So we do recommend that parents, especially if it looks like your child ingested or maybe swallowed some water down the wrong pipe of any significant amount, to definitely closely watch their kids, especially in the first couple of hours. But if it was a very minor incident and they just coughed up a little bit of water, if they're not really showing signs in the first couple of hours, it's not really going to just happen suddenly after that. It would definitely happen slowly over time with a cough and a fever.
That's really great information to know. So what should a parent do if their child gets in trouble in the water?
Well, the number one thing is probably going to be if you have someone around, and we always teach this when we're teaching basic life safety, is if there's someone else around, try to get them to go get help, whether that's call 911 or something, because you might be too engrossed to get the extra help later on. So if you're able to have someone else call for help, if you're by yourself, the first thing to do is try to help them, rescue them, have that rescue device ready that you prepared for. And if you don't, if you're a good swimmer, you can jump in and try to get them. When you're trying to take them out of the water, you want to, if they're unconscious, try to take them out horizontally if possible, which will avoid dropping their blood pressure. If you have multiple people available, if it was a dive sort of injury where they dove into the pool and could have potentially injured their neck, you want to make sure that you're not twisting their neck. Try to keep their neck as straight as possible, if that's possible. And then, if they're not breathing, obviously immediate CPR and then calling for help. So it's really important that anytime if you have a pool or your kids are going to be swimming in that every patient knows CPR, or if there's someone caring for their kids, whether that's a relative or a babysitter, that they also know CPR, because you never know when you might have to use it. Especially
if you have a pool, just to make sure that your family is safe and stays safe.
100%.
A big part of school age, your social life happens at the park. Before your child plays on the equipment, what should they know? So just, from anecdotal, there's a lot of different things obviously that can happen, but the biggest injuries that we see are head injuries and extremity injuries like the arm, wrist fractures and things like that. And most of the time it happens on monkey bars and climbers. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen a child come in with a wrist fracture or a head injury from that. So they need to make sure that, number one, they know what they're getting into before they sort of push themselves. So we all know there's monkey bars that are at lower level and higher level. So make sure that they've really mastered the ones at the lower level before they even try anything. And if you're taking kids to a playground, make sure that they're the kind that has the proper type of padding. So it shouldn't be concrete underneath those monkey bars, or even something as hard as dirt or grass, because even that, when compacted, can be a pretty solid surface that when the wrist lands on it, just snaps. So make sure that there's proper padding below, like sand or wood chips, things like that. A lot of the times when I would take like my nieces and nephews to the playground, it's like this soft foam that they have in the parks nowadays. So I'm sure that's definitely a great help if a child falls and things like that.
Yeah, that would also be an acceptable surface.
Okay, so let's talk about bicycle health and things like that. Let everybody know why a bicycle helmet should be worn, at all times, and also for what sports.
So, head injury itself specifically is the most common cause of death if you're going to have a bicycle accident. Now, when you combine bicycles and cars, that's going to be the most lethal combination, obviously. But even separate from cars, head injuries are still the most common cause of major injuries or even death in a bicycle accident. Now, and the other thing is you never know. You're going to be as safe as you want, but you never know what's going to happen as far as avoiding cars. You could be on the sidewalk and then someone suddenly backs out of a driveway. You just never know when it's going to happen. So definitely 100% anytime when you're on a bicycle, your children always have to have a helmet on, and adults too, obviously. As far as other sports, anything where any significant amount of speed can happen, either intentional or not. So, anything with wheels, you could definitely get carried away if you're not experienced. And so even if you don't intend to go fast, the child should definitely have helmets on. And they don't necessarily have to be bicycle helmets. There's, helmets made specifically for each activity, but rollerblades, skateboarding, scooters, anything like that, because you never know when they might get to a little bit of an incline and they get out of control more than they anticipated. And so that helmet's going to definitely come in handy.
Right. I want to switch to camping right quick. So when you go camping with your kids and you also go for a hike to prevent poison ivy, what should you do?
Well, the number one thing is avoidance. So the classic phrase is leave them three, let them be. They're kind of clustered. They all branch from a point in three. But, when you're hiking through the brush, you're not really going to be able to look at every single plant that you're going to brush up against. So you just want to make sure that your skin is completely covered. So long sleeves on the arms, gloves if you're going to really be going through thick brush, and then pants, not shorts, and using boots, things like that if you're really going to be in the thick of the brush.
What are some other things that we should do to prevent getting hurt while on a hike?
Being able to scout ahead, making sure to give plenty of time. One of the other things that we found during rescue attempts is that people sort of are a little bit over ambitious. So that maybe they just spontaneously feel like they want to go on a hike and they start it too late in the day. So don't be over ambitious of what you can accomplish, especially if you're doing sort of an in and out hike where it's going to take you a certain amount of time. You want to make sure that you plan way more than amount of buffer room so that you can get back before dark. It's not an uncommon thing for people to have to get rescued just because they get out deeper than they anticipated and they run out of light and then they lose their way somehow because of lack of light after sunset.
Absolutely. And while on a hike or at the beach, the holiday weekend is coming up. What type of sunscreen should we be using for people's kids?
Well, we generally recommend that everyone use minimum SPF 15 or above. The SPF is basically the factor that is sort of a multiplier for how long it would take you to burn. And so, if you were normally, and it can take for some people only 10 to 15 minutes to actually cause a sunburn, even if it's not visible.
Really?
The kind that you'll feel lately. Yeah. Well, I mean, not everybody, but, certain people are more sensitive than others, obviously. Mm-hmm. But if you were to take SPF 15, basically it would take that person theoretically 15 times longer to burn, so 150 minutes. So that's an important point because sometimes people don't start applying the sunscreen until they actually get to the beach and then they take off their shirt. So it's always recommended that you put on the sunscreen 15 to 30 minutes before going out because that 15 minutes or so before it starts to settle is the time that you could already start having sunburn. And again, sunburn is, there's obviously the part that we'd like to avoid, the pain, et cetera, the sensitivity, but it's more than just that. Obviously, it's also protecting your skin from the other effects, longer term effects of the sun, besides aging and wrinkling and all that kind of stuff, also skin cancers. So those are the kind of damages that occur over your lifetime. And then when you're later in your 40s and 50s, you start having skin cancers, particularly melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, things like that.
Should you apply it before leaving the house? Is that the best safety method?
Yeah, if you're able to do that, that's probably best. And one of the reasons why is that you never really want to apply sunscreen by themselves. We've all seen those people that have like a little sunburn in the middle of their back because they couldn't reach it and they're trying to do it themselves. So especially if it happens to adults, for kids, you want to make sure you're covering every inch of their body. So you kind of have someone that's plotting you to make sure that you're hitting every area. And so really the only way to do that is to be completely unclothed as much as unclothe as you're going to be at the beach in your swimwear. And it's really sometimes tough to do that, or you kind of do it in a hurry because everyone's, you get to the beach, you're all excited, and you just want to just jump in. And the other thing that people need to remember is to reapply it because, we say that minimum every 2 hours the sunscreen needs to be reapplied. That's what it's actually rated for. Mm-hmm. But it's not. But that's not taking into account if you're sweating, if you're swimming, if you're toweling off. Then every time you do one of those activities, you should be reapplying it at that time.
Amazing. Dr. Joseph Chan with Beverly Community Hospital. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.